welcome to everybody. We have a strong competition currently because lunch is going on, but I believe that millions of other people are following this since it is web streamed, and another million will take a look after the lunch. We have otherwise a very, let's say, I cannot use the word fashionable, but we have a very, very high intensive topic to discuss today. It is recovery of Ukraine, post-war recovery. Of course, the war first has to end, hopefully soon. I'm sure Ukraine will survive, hopefully win as a sovereign state in the borders of in its internationally recognized borders. Definitely, Russian attempt failed. They wanted to kill sovereignty of Ukraine. This didn't happen and will not happen for sure. And we have to think, now I will say Westerners, European Union, United States, I mean all the coalition which is assisting in Ukraine in defending its sovereignty. We also have to think how to organize the post-war reconstruction. It's a major effort, and many dilemmas are there opened, and more of them more or less technical, but every single dilemma has also some political consequences. So today we have a marvelous panel. We have two directly educated and experienced investment bankers among the participants, despite it was not planned like that. I mean, it's not a panel for investment bankers, it's a panel for policymakers about economic reconstruction, and we have people with other very interesting experiences, and of course representing very important stakeholders which will participate in this process. First, following the hierarchy, I would say, Paweł Nierada, the first vice president. Pardon, what I made a mistake. I will say first on my right side is Paweł Nierada, first vice president of Gospodarstwa, Krajowego, or better BGK. It's a Polish state-owned bank which was established to assist in regional development and also regional, tasks like the forthcoming is on the agenda with Ukraine. He is not only deputy chief, but also responsible for international relations, and this is exactly his portfolio. Next, who will join us is Oleksandr, but he said in 15 minutes. Oleksandr Gryban, Deputy Minister of Economy of Ukraine. Deputy Prime Minister couldn't join us, Ms. Stefanishina, but Oleksandr Gryban, also investment banker, will be perhaps even a better replacement. Then, not to mix with hierarchy, I will just continue with the positions next to me. Martin Dvořák, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, with an interesting career from crisis areas, or from out of a career experience in crisis management as well. So since he was in Kosovo exactly when it was the hottest after the war, and he was in Iraq and also participating in the discussions about the post-war reconstruction. Then perhaps representative of the most important stakeholder, Maciej Popowski, Director General of DG NIR, the most responsible directorate for not only Eastern Partnership, but particularly for Ukraine and assistance of European Union for the Ukraine. And then my old friend, Kurt Volker, he was many things in his career, currently more engaged in business community, but otherwise he was former United States ambassador to NATO. He was a special envoy or a special, appointed as a special envoy for the negotiations with Ukraine on behalf of United States government, and so on and so on. He will more represent, let's say, so-called American view. When Mr. Gryban will join us, perhaps he will already miss some of these introductory statements. Perhaps we will have to very briefly repeat or summarize things for him when he will join. Apparently he is with President Zelensky right now, coming from his office directly into our panel. But let me just briefly open this with few words. So February 24th this year changed history, definitely. What is happening now to Ukraine, all the cruelty of Russian occupiers and brutality of this war has no parallel in recent history. But we can draw some parallels related to reconstruction with prior experiences which the modern world has with post-war reconstructions of, for example, Marshall Plan after Second World War, reunification of Germany. Deputy Minister, Mr. Gryban, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hello everyone.
We just started. I wanted to mention also reconstruction of Iraq, of Bosnia and Afghanistan, and so on. So we have to mention also not cases of best practice. Ukrainian economy has experienced large negative shock. GDP contracted by some 30–35%. Despite the massive economic disruption and mounting fiscal challenges, budget deficit is some 5 billion euro per month. The government functions are largely operational. Ukrainians have a strong sense of common purpose and unity. The direct losses to the Ukrainian economy caused by the Russian invasion have already reached around $113 billion. This is an assessment of Kiev Economic School, which is a very respected scientific organization. Together with indirect losses, which are calculated based on different assumptions, the economy was harmed for some 600 billion euros until now, and the war didn't stop yet, unfortunately. So who knows what will be in the future. So when we talk about costs, and of course taking into account that any estimates or damages are tentative, we have to have in mind that Ukrainian GDP last year was $200 billion. So if they would, I don't know, with pre-war GDP, dedicate 10% of GDP annually for reconstruction, this would take, let's say, 20–30 years. Of course, this would make a major problem for all European Union and United States and all the Western allies. So somebody will have to pay this, apart from Ukrainians. Who will pay? recently I listened to former Finnish Prime Minister Oleksandr who said that everybody helps and will help, but it's already now clear that United States will cover military costs and EU will cover costs of recovery. Do you agree with this thesis? Perhaps Mr. Popowski first, and then Kurt briefly, and of course Mr. Gryban.
Thank you very much. Well, it's almost a cliche that the Americans do the war and we do the reconstruction. But of course it's not an American war, and we will do the reconstruction, but not alone. What's important for us, and I think we have a full understanding with the Ukrainian authorities, with the president and the government, that it needs to be a process driven by the Ukrainians and owned by them. They've already presented a recovery plan that was presented by Prime Minister Šmihal at the Lugano conference in July, and we want to be in it together with them. President von der Leyen also offered our co-lead in the future, we call it reconstruction platform for lack of a better term. So we're still working on it. We are not at the stage of identifying all sources of funding, and as you said, the estimates are estimates. The latest figure by the World Bank is some 750 billion euros in damage, but this is changing by the day. But there is a needs assessment already, and the World Bank is going to present it publicly, I hope next week. So we can base ourselves on that and see what we need for that. We've already provided a lot of financial support. I mean, I'm making a distinction between military support, also European military support, and financial support to the government, liquidity support. And there is more to come. So we made this announcement of 9 billion euros in, we call it microfinancial assistance, which is long maturity loans. But of course, we need to be creative. And what we want to do, and President von der Leyen was very clear about it and spoke about it in Lugano, is to follow the logic and in a way the mechanics as well of the post-COVID recovery in Europe. First of all, we want to build back better, use this opportunity to change things that needs to be changed, but also to see whether we can replicate some of the tools that we develop for that. We're not sitting on a big pile of cash. Everybody thinks we are, but it's not true. So we have to find the money somewhere on the market. We have to be creative with our guarantees, and we have to partner up with everybody. I mean, all the countries and organizations that are willing to take part in the reconstruction effort, starting with the United States, but also with other like-minded non-EU partners like, I don't know, Norway, Japan, Switzerland, and the banks. World Bank, EBRD, EIB, but also national development banks like BGK here present, but many others. So we need to create this community of donors and start driving this process. Later this year, we will come with some details on our own tool that we already announced in May of a Ukraine reconstruction facility, a new budgetary tool of the EU that we want to use for that particular purpose.
Thanks. Perhaps Mr. Gryban now, and then Kurt Volker. Please, Mr. Gryban, can we hear your view?
Yep, thank you, Janez. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Super. I'm really pleased to be in such an honorable company, and so I'm really happy to share the vision from the inside. What is happening in Ukraine? What processes have already started? What still needs to be done? And I'm going to be also talking a little bit from the perspective of the Ministry of Economy, because we have different buddies in the country, but I have my own objectives, and we'll try to build it around the goals that we, as the Ministry of Economy, are also looking forward to implement. So to start with the the survival mode is something that we are currently facing, and we need to admit it that yes, it's probably taking longer than everybody expected and probably wanted, but we clearly see the shift. First of all, on the battlefield, and then we clearly see the shift in terms of Ukrainians doing their homework and preparing the proper algorithms and structures for the future potential redistribution of whatever the recovery fund will be eventually, right? So, of course, it's very important to finalize all the sanctions programs and still chase the Russian assets. I think this is the goal number one, and this is the perfect source of funding primarily the budget deficit in Ukraine, which unfortunately still is rather huge in terms of like what we're having there, you know, and it's still 5 to 6 billion a month, and these are the social payments and army, but hopefully when more good news from the battlefield is going to arrive, the army expenses could potentially go down, but this is a separate discussion. So, and of course, we still need this in the form of technical aid, in the form of grants, and in the form of like the support that could essentially be almost free or free. So this is still something we're really looking for and expect from our partner countries. And at the same time, we're also looking further. And again, speaking as the Deputy Minister of Economy, I must say that we should be doing something with our economy, because we need to crack on. We need to get back to at least the pre-war GDP and try to overcome it. And of course, we as the government do a lot of efforts on a daily basis how to make it happen. We understand that well, it's always kind of easy to say that it's hard to invest in the country that is in the martial law and has the war happening, but still we're thinking ahead, and we are really eager to develop the idea of the investment insurance tool that could potentially be sourced as the part of the technical aid that we could potentially get from our partner countries. And let's say that would be not the immediate liquidity to be spent here in Ukraine for recovery, but rather some frozen deposit to cover the exposures of MIGA, for instance, the World Bank institution that has some proper instruments, and they do have experience in terroristic environments. So I think they are rather familiar with what is going on there in Ukraine. And if some kind of insurance tool could be invented and the FDI could flow, I can promise you we can really source good projects. And if you may, I will briefly share with you the ideas that we're currently working on in terms of like the investment menu, that's how we call it.
Okay, yeah, it was not planned, but please go on, but please be short.
Yeah. Well, I can also, well, I think I don't have the proper rights for that, so we can actually skip it. So the idea is that we've prepared the different fields where the investments could be generated, and that was driven by the resources, the locations of these potential enterprises, and then what we're currently doing is we're actually getting down to the specific projects, and we have a specially designated team of investment banking and private equity specialists that are working as a government team, and this will be like a separate investment attraction campaign, which I think will also emerge in Europe. It's supported by the WPP, one of the marketing giants, and We actually going to have on the 6th of September the opening of the New York Stock Exchange event where the first Deputy Prime Minister is going to participate, and we will sort of present this investment menu. But again, as I said, none of these investments is actually possible without the coverage. I know we can still structure the ways how to get to them after the war, but we also need something now, otherwise we will always be asking, because we need something to add value. We need the economy to reboost. And actually export credit loans is also one of the sources that we're actively exploring and we are ready to work with. And this, as I understand, should give additional comfort and benefits for the countries that are backing it up. And for instance, we're currently structuring the government-to-government agreement with Austria, which will attract a couple of blend of export credit agencies from OKB from Austria to UCAF to Euler Hermes from Germany. And this already anticipates the involvement of the European, German, Austrian contractors, suppliers, which works for us as soon as we get the cheap financing, which it is, because it's the combination of the sovereign debt and the export credit coverage. And so it gives us the long-term and cheaper exposure, and we use it for energy efficiency, for optimization of the public transport, for ESG standards already, because we kind of have to, and this is good because we have another kind of stick to use here in Ukraine, and say otherwise it won't happen, and so the different ideas, and we also support the idea of the World Bank Recovery Fund. We think this is a great initiative. And again, if any other structures could be emerging, we're also ready to hop on, and we are trying to build in Ukraine the last mile instruments as well, because it's triggering specific cabinet of ministers decrees, different policies, orders, etc. And we're doing this homework to get ready when the recovery funds would come. We have this last mile algorithm which are transparent, which involve the agencies like USAID, the EU for Business initiative from the European Union. So we also set up the big program of grants supporting different types of entrepreneurs, from micro to small and medium enterprises. So it's also transparent, digitalized, it's open for everybody, and we're actually even ready to co-share it in administration-wise with somebody from Europe, for instance. And I know that there are grants of the GIZ, the grants of the different other institutions, European institutions, but again, so we're open for any type of this cooperation. I hope I didn't bore you too much.
No. Thanks. That was really refreshing to hear about all these concrete ideas, and we will come later once again to these concrete forms of potential capital inflow. But now I would like to pass the floor to Kurt Volker.
Okay. Thank you, Janez. Thank you to our Slovene host for inviting me here. It's great to be here. Let me comment on three things at this stage, but we'll come back to more. First, on your division of labor. The U.S. prepares the war and the EU does the finances. I don't think it should be that way. The U.S. is providing more than 10 times what anybody else is giving to Ukraine to fight the war. I wish others were doing more. I think we should all be wanting this war to end as quickly as possible on Ukraine's terms. Second, in terms of what's needed, let me just comment on that. The U.S. provision of precision-guided munitions has made a big difference in the latest phases of the war. It's going behind the front lines, taking out Russian fuel, food, logistics, ammunition. making it very difficult for Russia to sustain its forces in the field. And that will come into play already, as we see in Kherson, and it will come into play even more over the winter. But what is needed is longer range, not just the 80 kilometers that's now being provided, but up to 300-kilometer range artillery, fighter aircraft, heavy armor, including tanks, and more air defenses to protect the cities, because the only way Russia can fight now is to lob dumb bombs at cities. And this is a devastating effect on the civilian population. We have to do everything we can to protect the civilian population. So those are the needs of the war. On the economy, I just want to say, I think this is the most underrated aspect of Ukraine winning the war. People seem to have an impression that there's time, that, well, when the war's over, we can rebuild the economy. There is no time. Ukraine needs budgetary support for public finances right now, and Ukraine's economy needs to start recovering right now, because a robust economy is important for tax revenue, and it is important for funding the war effort, and it's important for people getting their normal lives back. So no one should be waiting for the end of the war. We should be figuring out how to stimulate and rebuild Ukraine's economy today. So I think that's an incredibly important point. Second point on the economy is that when people talk about it, there seems to be an assumption, at least I hear it this way, that governments will have lots of money, and it's what Maciej said as well, the EU is sitting on a pile of money, which it's not, that governments will have a lot of money, and governments will spend money, and that will recover the economy. That's not the way it works. That government aid programs will be spent once and be gone. So what's important is to use those funds in ways that create the conditions for the private sector to reemerge and grow. This is absolutely essential. So what Oleksandr said about insurance, for instance, political risk insurance or war risk insurance, that would be a good use of EU or US or Ukraine state-provided funds to enable the private sector to come in and do its job of investment without the major downside risk. At the Lugano conference, Foreign Secretary of UK Liz Truss mentioned the reinsurance industry, where the City of London can be a factor where the government could provide funding to help insure the insurers so they can lower the rates that are charged to companies that are then seeking to invest. But these are the sort of things that need to be thought about. This is a two-way street. On the Ukrainian side, they need to take steps as well. Everything from decentralization, passing legislation and regulations to align the economy with the European Union as quickly as possible, to strengthen the rule of law and increase confidence that businesses have that rule of law will be implemented fairly in order to facilitate that private investment. So it's a two-way street, but those things have to be done. And the final thing is, we are sitting on a pile of money. It is frozen Russian central bank assets. And I think it is essential that the United States and the European Union figure out the legal means of using these assets to support Ukraine's reconstruction. We're talking several $100 billion, and there is no reason from a moral or political perspective why these should not be used to support Ukraine's reconstruction, and we need to find the legal means to back that up.
Almost applaud. And that's really what I think should be done, and it's a good message. But allow me now to turn to Mr. Dvořák, Deputy Minister from Czechia, who is not only Deputy Minister of a country which has a presidency of European Union and will have to deal with all this in next half a year, on what I'm of course interested, what are the plans, but also has his personal experience, as I mentioned already, in crisis management in Iraq and Kosovo after the war. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all. You are coming in time of lunch and after lunch sleeping. Sleeping right now here, some of you. Okay, thank you for the question. I would like to continue with the idea of Mr. Volker, because you said we cannot wait until war is finished. I would like to say Czechia didn't wait even until war was started. We started to support Ukraine before the war, and of course right now we are deeply focused on everything what is going on in Ukraine, and I'm proud to say that we are among top 10 countries that are supporting Ukraine as much per capita. Speaking about sources or funds for reconstruction, you are absolutely right as well, and our program is we don't speak only about reconstruction or afterward reconstruction, but we have to speak and we have to work on stabilization of Ukraine right now. We understand there are some different parts in Ukraine. Some of them are heavily bombed and destroyed, and some of them are somehow relatively in quiet mode, and we have to support this part as much as possible. And also I agree with you, we have to support the development of local economy, because it might be first of all, Ukrainian economy, which will deliver and which will pump the blood in the veins. And so we are speaking about funds, and I have to be fair. I am economist by very beginning, and even for me, it's very hard to really imagine the amount of money what we are speaking about. There are so many zeros that for me, I feel lost in that. So this is so much money, and my experience is that always the expectations of the country. You mentioned my experience with a post-conflict situation. The expectations are higher than real demand, and demands are much higher than real capacity available. So this is something what we have to understand and what we have to face with. And I really believe that this is not the biggest problem. From my experience, to repair or to reconstruct, to rebuild, so what I'm calling hardware, means roads, infrastructure, new machine, new cars, airports, whatever, it's costly. But it's very, very easy. It's just it takes some time, but it's done like this. What is the next step is to change the minds, the software, what I'm calling. What is, let's say, rule of law, we mentioned it. It's real acceptance of democratic rules. It's not only rule of law, it's about independence medias. It's about how to stop the misusing of political power. Somebody who is actually in power in this post-totalitarian countries or post-war countries could very slightly misuse his position, because everybody is happy, this is a new democratic leader, let's help him, and nobody controls. And it could make a very, very huge damage, let's say, reputation risks. Because in case that some kind of real huge bribes or corruption will be presented, will be shown, it might really destroy our confidence in future development in the country after war. So this is something what I think, I thought it's necessary to be said as well. Okay, you are bankers, you are investment bankers, you know what I'm speaking about much more than I do. But I'm thinking now about the next step, maybe after 20 years. But still, we have to think that we have also to change the minds, we have to change the software in the society in post-war, in war conflict, which is definitely not very easy. So maybe this is, and also I would say that we as a presidency country, we have a program for reconstruction and stabilization in Ukraine, and we are in coherence with the Lugano, etc. But I think it's not a matter for the moment.
Thanks. Mr. Nierada, you are also an investment banker, or at least close to investor bankers. And since you are a state-owned bank and you have close cooperation with the Polish government, somehow I'm happy to have you here also as a, let's say, representative of one of the countries which is, apart from Czechia and a few others, very heavily involved in current assistance and views on future reconstruction efforts and future cooperation and integration of Ukraine into European Union. How would you, from the perspective of a banker, organize this process? What would you suggest? And what the international so-called donors or financial institutions, IMF, EBRD, European Investment Bank, and the others could and should do to assist Ukraine in the reconstruction efforts?
Yeah, I think I'm again very happy to be here. I always appreciate Bled and Slovenia. And indeed, we as a bank, we have been established 100 years ago, basically, by the Polish state. And as a Polish development bank, and as long as we, of course, are fully state-owned entity, we are not the government agenda, we are a bank. A little different, so we are not focused on making profit by all costs. Our mission is to sustain to support the sustainable development of the Polish economy and community social. As you mentioned, we are indeed a sort of frontline country because we are next to Ukraine. We have a very long border, and there's over 5 million people from Ukraine who migrate to Poland. A lot of them migrated back, but it's estimated that about 2.5, maybe 3 million people actually stayed in Poland for various reasons. One of them, that even before the war, there was actually quite a large exchange, a large Ukrainian community that developed in Poland. So the people actually got their relatives who were already living in Poland, they got a place to go. And also because we are close, and I think majority of these of Ukrainians still believe they will be able to return home relatively soon. And coming to that perspective, it's so we are facing multi-layer issues. One thing is what we have discussed here, so is how to, well, scenario A is Ukraine got to win this war, full stop. There is any other scenario is no good scenario. And then we have to, well, rebuild the economy of Ukraine, which is both, as Mr. Volker mentioned, is very important to make sure the Ukrainian state is going on right now, despite all this destruction, all the lost territories, all the havoc of war. They have to function as a state. And then, of course, there is this 700 billion euro estimated needs for redevelopment of what was actually destroyed by the Russian invasion. And on top of that, we have all these current issues with the people who migrated to Poland predominantly. So we have to, as we did, we launched in our bank a dedicated fund, which is actually quite similar in structure to the COVID solution, that is actually focusing on supporting the refugees, both in Poland and possibly outside in Ukraine, and that goes from support to the Polish companies that are creating working places for the Ukrainians, so they could earn a living. It's actually a very important comment to make, that the Ukrainian refugees, they don't want free money. Yeah? They really try to become useful. Yeah? So they want to figure out in the Polish economy how can they contribute to make them their living, and I think it's very something to admire. And also we are currently working also with the European Commission. For instance, we as a BGK, we are one of the first certified implementing agent for the direct for the Commission funds, and we have been mandated with the COVID related budget basically to fund non-EU countries who could not afford the COVID vaccines, so they could be delivered with the vaccination for COVID. When in February there was still about 40 million of that was still not used, and there was a little interest, so we discussed with Mr. Popowski actually to shift some of this money to as a imminent direct help for Ukraine. So this is how we have to start thinking outside the box, because there is a lot of discussion, a lot of declarations about providing funds, giving funds. There is a lot of discussion, and it's all good, like the insurance, the foreign export-import insurance facilities, and so. But this is one part of the story. We are still talking about some kind of the loan. It can be relatively cheap, if you like, if anything can be cheap in these markets these days. But on top of that, the loan has to be repaid. And I think there is another layer. A lot of declarations were about the grants. I think Ukraine will need, as we all mentioned here, another Marshall Plan, which is in fact money that will be not directly returned, because the scale of the devastation and the needs is simply that large. It's difficult to imagine that the Ukraine, which was even before the war not the world's richest nation, it's very difficult how it would be able to repay additional 700 billion of loan. So I think it's what you mentioned is creating out-of-the-box structures. We are working also in coordination with the European Commission on creating such a fund that would be provided for the entities, for bodies to grant money. It's also very important to develop on the Ukrainian side a structure that would give this comfort that this money will be used properly. And I think we would all benefit from actually bringing back Ukraine to not even to what it was before, but much more a regular member of the European community.
Thanks. We have heard many initiatives already. Yesterday, for example, President of the Commission, Madame von der Leyen, mentioned 10 billion euros already launched as an assistance from EU budget or European financial structures. We have heard announcement of Japanese government, how they will be engaged in the reconstruction of infrastructure, then announcements of Danish government, of different stakeholders, some of them on a state level, some of them are offering reconstruction assistance to Mykolaiv, to Kherson, to Kharkiv, and so on and so on. So different local communities. And this will be if this will not be properly coordinated, it will be a mess. I was director of the Energy Community Secretariat for 9 years. We were in charge of technical assistance to to Ukraine as well. And I have seen how when so many donors, who were not really coordinated, were offering the same technical assistance for the same things to the same stakeholders in Ukraine, and of course stepping on each other's toes. And some stakeholders in Ukraine took advantage out of this because they had their own interests. So I think we are all in. Usually we mention Marshall Fund as a success story of post-war reconstruction. Marshall Fund had its own authority to manage the funds. Ukraine already established a fund which is called U24, United 24, and Mr. Ustenko, who is economic advisor to President Zelensky, said we want to manage all this assistance by ourselves. After this war, we will be a new nation, give us money, and we will manage it properly. And on the other side, we have different other initiatives. Trust Fund with World Bank, which is right now being developed and should be operational next year. Mr. Popowski mentioned a new structure, or which will be called Ukrainian Budget Facility. So many initiatives. Who will coordinate all this? Is European Union preparing something, a new potential body which would manage this? Is there some, and then of course I will ask about other potential donors. Mr. Popowski.
We are not preparing a body because that would scare everybody off, because we don't want to take over. But what we did in May was to propose a reconstruction platform, which would be actually a donor coordination platform. Donor coordination is not a new challenge. We've seen it many times in the past. It's always difficult. But that's why it's so important that the Ukrainian government takes ownership of it. So we are not imposing things on them. I mean, it's a sovereign country, it's their country. We are there to help. And we should be as inclusive as possible. So we put forward this proposal for an international platform as a meeting place and coordination tool open to all donors of goodwill and the international institutions such as banks. And then the Ukrainian government made a similar proposal, which was presented at Lugano. We just need to, to make sure that we are on the same page, and that it can be then launched as soon as possible. The idea was not to create a central management institution, that we would take funds from, I don't know, the United States or the World Bank and manage it, because it will never work. We are talking about huge sums of public money. So we have to make sure it's done well, with a certain level of assurances for the donor community, and it will be, so we are going to provide collectively the Ukrainian authorities with a mix of loans and grants. Probably there will be more loans, plus of course we should be creative, and I very much agree with Kurt that we should target the Russian assets. I don't know how. We need a creative legal solution, which for us Europeans may be a bit more difficult than for you, the US. But fine, we should try to get there. Then think about the insurance schemes, guarantees for investors, and then long maturity loans. That's why I mentioned the post-COVID recovery. Now, what we are doing now with our next generation EU instrument is that we as the Commission, we take loans on the markets and put them at the disposal of the member states for their own national recovery plans. That's the way it works, because we don't have that amount of cash that is needed. So we should just follow that logic. And what we need, and I would like to pick up a point that Martin Dvořák made, it's about the software. That's really important. And that's where the European path and the future membership comes into play. Because they have to deliver a lot. We already came up with a list of things to be done, and that they were mentioned in our opinion on their membership applications. It's very specific. It's very clear. They're already delivering on them, and having in place functioning institutions with a good track record in fight against corruption, for instance, or in regulating the economy would be hugely reassuring for any future investors. And that's what we need, and I think that's where we are heading.
Thanks. Kurt, Mr. Popowski mentioned steps to be taken. Americans like to use expression conditionality. I mean, now it's perhaps a little bit, let's say, improper to use it in the case of a country in a war, but we should, I believe, all take this opportunity as like Hillary Clinton once said, never waste a good crisis. It's to make things better with decarbonization, digitalization. I mean, I believe this should all be not, let's say, conditions for the recovery spending. Could you present, let's say, a Washington perspective on this so-called steps to be taken?
Okay, well, first off, I would not want to use the word conditionality. I would say it's a two-way street, that Ukraine has responsibilities and we have responsibilities, and we both need to do all of that. So it's the only way forward. So I think that's right. Second, I think it is an opportunity as we see substantial funds going toward the recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine, that these can be done in a way that accelerate Ukraine's transition to EU standards. So it should make Ukraine's adoption of laws, regulations, and market practices closer to the European Union faster than otherwise would be the case. So I think we have to think about it in that way as well. A couple of other thoughts on steps to be taken. I think Maciej put his finger on several important points in what he said, and I want to highlight that again. There needs to be a coordinating platform. No one is going to be in charge of other people's stuff. The Ukrainians are not going to get a fund that they run. The EU is not going to let the US manage its funds. The US is not going to let the EU manage its funds. So we need to, what I would propose is a structure like this. We need to have each, United States, European Union, individual EU member states, UK, Canada, Ukraine, everybody appoint a senior coordinator for Ukraine recovery, which reports directly to the president or prime minister, a senior level position like that. These then meet together as a coordinating body where they can hear Ukrainian priorities, they can look at what tools each of them has available, they can try to coordinate what actions we take, they can try to deconflict as much as possible. But implementation will be done through national means or EU means because that's the only way we can do things. So I think that's one thing. Second, I think that this should be advised by a private sector body, a non-government body of economists, experts, finance experts, private industry, who can identify what the obstacles are and tell the governments, you need to do this. You need to put a higher priority on demining because the oil and gas exploration can't happen if you have unexploded ordnance on the field. Or you need to put a higher priority on shipping because you're never going to get the volume of exports. Or you need to put it, whatever it might be, those who are actually implementing and trying to do it will be able to advise this governing structure. Here are the priorities that we see as well. But I think we need to get something like that set up very quickly. And as Maciej said, the Ukrainians need to propose this and drive this, but it's not going to be directed in any way. It's got to be a coordinating mechanism like that. And I just want to say too, I agree with Martin and Maciej. The software is important. I would simply say I think Ukraine is farther ahead than we give them credit for. I think that their people, they are of a European mentality. They are of a reform mentality. They have not performed. The implementation has not been good. But I think the war has changed things, and there is an opportunity now to really take several steps forward.
Okay, thanks. Perhaps you would add, again, this coordination will have to be established, I believe, during the Czech presidency.
It's a real challenge. I'm not sure whether we are able to manage this in the short time of 4 months. What I'd like to add is, sorry to be once again personal, when I came into Kosovo village named Istok as a UN administrator, I didn't know absolutely anything about needs of this village. I've never been there before. So I tried to manage agreement between me and the local authorities without any official authority. I used to have an official authority power, but I didn't have any knowledge They did have knowledge, but they didn't have authority. And I think it might be a similar situation now with Ukraine. So there is no doubt that must be Ukrainians who will decide what is the priority, which road or which airport or what should be repaired and reconstructed or rebuilt first, and what should wait a little bit. On the other hand, I also respect the rule who pays, decide, and also control. So I believe that there will be some body which will be able to coordinate all the international support, help, and donation going to Ukraine. Ukraine should decide which target must be reached first, and there must be a body which is able to control how the money has been spent. Because, as I said, it could be a problem, huge reputational risk I see there. Because despite all of my belief to Ukrainians, and I believe that their minds is now changing because of the war, and they are now facing huge challenge. But this enthusiasm or braveness might disappear after the war. And there will be very hard time for Ukrainians. And they will be frustrated, and they will be not very satisfied with the government and with us as donors. They will always ask, give us more, we need more. And I think, in case we are thinking where to invest, we have also invested a lot of money and a lot of energy and our effort into the software, into education of people, to teach them how to live in democracy and in free market and etc. What I'm afraid right now Ukraine is not in the proper level yet.
Thanks. In the meantime, we lost connection, I think, with Mr. Gryban, or are we still online? Seems not. So we cannot ask him for Ukrainian position related.
I'd like to hear it.
Yeah. What is written there? Or there is some exchange of emails. Okay, now we are on 2:20. Would you like to add something, Mr. Nierada?
Just if I can add, actually, we have been we have been a manager for the European Union funds in Poland since the accession of Poland to the European Union. And this was very case applied to Poland as any European Union country, that there are a lot of grants, a lot of funds, but you have to distribute them. And of course, we are not distributing them like micromanaging every single one, but we have managed to develop the schemes, the mechanism, and the whole, if you like, technology of making it easily available within the legal required frameworks, and also how to monitor it properly and report back to the donors, to the funders, and we are already cooperating very closely with Ukrainian different bodies like National Bank of Ukraine, etc., ministries, and we are more than happy to share that knowledge with whoever is going to be named as a governing body or by the Ukrainian government. Because I'm proud to say, I think we are one of the countries with the lowest fraud issue on using European funds, European money.
And the country with almost highest percentage of utilization of available European funds. I was always envious. Once I was Minister for Environment, and Poland was always faster than us in utilization. Mr. Gryban, thanks for being with us. I don't know if you heard all the discussion, but there was a dilemma how to organize all this donors' assistance. We have heard views from outside Ukraine, a special platform, coordination, but we are interested in Ukrainian view, please.
Well, thank you. I here tend to agree with Kurt that it will be pretty difficult to find the single solution for like the universal way out of this, because every donor and every sponsor of this thing will obviously be requiring the due level of involvement and some structure that fits their own like legislation and expectations the most. That is my feeling. At the same time, it's our goal to, even if we have these different platforms, that'd be really good to have like just few, you know, like not 10. It'd be great to have 3 that be continentally driven or something, you know, like obviously European, US, maybe Asian one, and then we are ready to again to do our homework to provide the due level of transparency and accountability when this will be delivered to the end users, whatever form it's going to be. I think there will be like a separate form, definitely, which will go just for like the immediate recovery of the critical infrastructure. And then there should be another portion which should be stimulating growth and development, because again, as we were discussing here, this is something which is not the key priority now, and it's obvious that we need to focus on the different things. But there should be a separate section which will be stimulating the economic growth and integration with European, Western, and like developed countries community as well, like becoming the commodity chain, production chain member. Like all these initiatives and all the incentives that we already got from the European Union, for instance, that this is just great, like that we can be selling goods without extra customs duties, and this is a huge opportunity for us, and we would like to outsource the production in Ukraine, you know, and it makes total economic sense. So again, getting back to the main question, how should it be arranged? It's pretty hard to say. I think it should be some trustworthy multilateral institution that probably the World Bank is sort of like trying to be the first and then the only. I don't know, maybe this is not the case, but this could be the case eventually, because this is the institution which gains trust from numerous players and strategic and geopolitical. At the same time, again, like if that'd be 3 funds, also good. We even had some ideas. We had the separate group working and like brainstorming, and they suggested the Luxembourg registered private equity type of fund, you know, which will have the supervisory board, the advisory board, which will be audited by the Big Four, and it will be, but that again should only relate to the economic development probably component of it, because the social and critical infrastructure component just needs to answer like a couple of major questions. Again, the transparency and the accountability. What is the procurement system? What is the reporting system? And what is the pricing approach to that? So these are all like questions that obviously definitely interest any donor, any participant of such activity, and it is our goal to develop something which will be trustworthy. We have pretty good procurement system. It's called Prozoro. It was developed with the help of USAID. It obviously needs some improvement, and we already started working on it together with 2 major ministries, because the way it's arranged, like the Ministry of Economy is responsible for the policy making, especially in the public procurement as well. And we have 2 major kind of beneficiaries of this, is the Ministry of Regional Development and the Ministry of Infrastructure. These guys will be doing the most work in the recovery and rebuilding, bringing the homes back, bringing bridges and roads back, and bringing eventually people back, right? And so, but it is our goal as the Ministry of Economy to make sure that this procurement system is the one that satisfies our partners, the countries and the unions that are supporting us. And we obviously want to, it is also our interest to make it as transparent and accountable as it can be, because we have no other chance to waste. You know, there was a very bad saying that the Ukraine never miss a chance to miss a chance. So we really want to break it this time, and we don't want to miss the chance this time, because this is already life-changing, and the price we're paying for this is way too high.
Mr. Gryban, just a sub-question. President Zelensky established a National Council for the Recovery with 24 working groups, which is working now on this recovery plan, let's say. This is a parallel structure to the government. Who will be in charge of recovery activities in Ukraine? Will be this government? Will be there a special body? We were talking about special body on outside Ukraine, but now I'm asking about special body inside Ukraine.
Well, I know that there's definitely something is getting prepared. I'm probably not fully aware of everything that's going on. And I heard like the most viable version as by now is that the sort of like the recovery agency will be created, and it will most likely be governed by Ukrainian, who is also the associated professor in Oxford or Stanford. I'm not sure, but in one of the universities. It's a well-known guy, and then it was built like the whole concept was built with the support of McKinsey, and I think if that would be the viable agency to emerge, it would still be destined, you know, to work with the outside of Ukraine agencies, because I still think that some institutions will be created there based on the rules of their creators, which will comfort them the most. And this is our goal, to have such relevant counterpart here in Ukraine that they would understand each other, you know, from like just saying few words. So it should be under the same rules, should be the same auditing and etc. We just need to split the tasks, and the agency that we are gonna have here could obviously have the supervisory board represented by all our partner countries and the agencies and multilateral institutions. We have some successful examples with the corporate governance reform, where the supervisory bodies are working in the big state enterprises quite successfully, and they actually accommodate experts from all over the world. So I think the eventual model could be like this. So we create the trustworthy vendor, also like complemented by the international expertise, and then we have hopefully 1 or 2 or 3 institutions that we work with, and do it but case by case, project by project, and industry by industry, something like this. This is my opinion, and I am not aware of everything that's going on. And
No, understandable. No. And thanks for this input. I mean, the time expired, but we started a few minutes later, so I think we can afford a little bit of delay, because I'm obliged to ask also audience if there are perhaps any urgent questions, perhaps up to 2 of them for panelists, whomever. Would somebody like to raise a question? Seems not, so this means that we will fit into the time schedule. So we don't have a key listener like many other panels who is now then summarizing or kind of concluding what was said. I would just say that I think the most burning issue is how to organize ourselves outside Ukraine, how to organize Ukrainian authorities inside Ukraine. Of course, how fast to win the war. I'm not talking. I mean, this is not part of today's discussion, and that there should be many innovative instruments for the capital inflow. Not only classical grants or loans, but also a lot of other guarantees, insurances and reinsurances and so on, which will, of course, allow that public money will flow in, but also private capital. Because I believe in the forthcoming recession around the world, there will be not much appetite of many governments to spend a lot of public money in Ukraine reconstruction, and a lot of work will have to be done by private capital, and for this, of course, Ukraine has to be sufficiently attractive with rule of law, which is in the name of today's or this conference. I would just like to thank you to panelists for all your contribution. It was interesting. I think everybody, and especially Mr. Gryban, who jumped in the last minute and took a time between many meetings in a currently very active Kyiv, they deserve a short applause.